my friends, story time with Mrs. Beth again. I'm pretty excited because this book, Mrs. Toggle's Zipper, is about a school teacher. There are many great school teachers out there. A shout out to my daughter Rachel, who's an amazing school teacher, but right now she's home because soon she's gonna have a baby, and I'm so excited. But let's read this story together. When Mrs. Toggle's children arrived at school in the morning, they changed in the hall from their boots to their shoes. When the bell rang, they picked up their boots and book bags and marched along to their room. They stuffed boots and bags into their cubbyholes and hung up their coats. Then they sat down at their desks. "Good morning, Mrs. Toggle," the children said in their best morning voices. "Good morning, class," said Mrs. Toggle in an unusually grumpy voice. Then the children noticed that Mrs. Toggle was still wearing her coat, the big, puffy, fuchsia-colored one that she got for Christmas. "Mrs. Toggle," yelled Joey, "you forgot to take off your coat." "I didn't forget," said Mrs. Toggle uncomfortably. "I can't take it off because the zipper is stuck. I'm afraid it's going to be a long, hot day." "How'd the zipper get stuck?" Nina asked. Mrs. Toggle fanned her face. "How does any zipper get stuck? First, a tiny bit of cloth gets caught in it. Then you pull and keep pulling a little too hard, and before you know it, you're trapped in your coat like a hand in a cookie jar." The children gathered around Mrs. Toggle's desk to see for themselves. "Yep," said Joey, "the zipper sure is stuck." The others nodded and agreed. "What's worse," said Mrs. Toggle, "the thingamajig is gone." "The what?" said the children. "The thingamajig that you pull the zipper up and down with. Mine is lost." "Oh," groaned the children. They all thought happily about their own coats hanging on hooks with their zippers open and the thingamajig still on them. "Maybe we can help," said Caroline. "Well, it's worth a try," said Mrs. Toggle. Mrs. Toggle braced her feet on the floor. She leaned forward in her chair and held out her arms. Some children grabbed one sleeve, some the other sleeve. Paul and Nina grabbed fistfuls of the collar. "Now!" yelled Mrs. Toggle, and everyone pulled. And everybody landed with thuds and bumps in a heap on the floor. Mrs. Toggle's collar was as far as her nose, but no further than that. Paul wanted to get busy learning the timetables. "Mrs. Toggle," he said, "let's go to the nurse's office. Maybe Mrs. Scout can help you." So Mrs. Toggle and the children trudged down to the office of Mrs. Scout, the school nurse. When Mrs. Scout saw Mrs. Toggle's hot, red face, she reached for the thermometer and popped it into Mrs. Toggle's mouth. Mrs. Toggle shook her head. "Don't talk with the thermometer in your mouth," said Mrs. Scout sternly. "I'll telephone your mother." Mumbled Mrs. Toggle. "Mouth closed," ordered Mrs. Scout. Nina spoke up. "She's not sick, and she doesn't live with her mother because she's a grown-up. Mrs. Toggle is hot because she can't get her coat off, the zipper stuck, and the thingamajig is lost." "Then we must pull it off," said Mrs. Scout. "Oh, we tried that," Paul said. "Well, this time we'll add a bandage," the nurse answered. "Bandages make boo-boos better. But first, Mrs. Toggle, we must take the thermometer out of your mouth." Mrs. Scout stuck a bandage on the zipper where the thingamajig was supposed to be. Then she pulled, and the children pulled. And they all ended up with thuds and bumps and bangs on the floor of Mrs. Scout's office. Mrs. Toggle's collar was as far as her nose, but no further than that. Mrs. Scout shook her head. "I must call the principal. He'll know what to do with you." The principal, Mr. Strickler, left important matters on his desk to hurry to the nurse's office. Mr. Strickler frowned when he saw Mrs. Toggle. Mrs. Toggle, it's against school rules to wear your coat all day. I am sorry, said Mrs. Toggle, but I can't take my coat off. The zipper is stuck. Tell them about the thingamajig, said Nina. The what? Mr. Strickler asked. You know, said Paul. The what's it? The doodad, said Carolyn. The whatchamacallit, said Joey. My students are right, said Mrs. Toggle. The thingamajig is missing from my zipper. The principal frowned again. Mrs. Toggle, he said, in my job I have learned that if you want to get out of a tight spot, you must follow the rules. Pay attention, children, he said. Make 2 straight lines. 1 line pull on the right arm, the other line pull on the left. Mrs. Scout, you be responsible for the collar. I shall pull on Mrs. Toggle's feet. We tried that, said Joey. Pulling doesn't work, Nina agreed. Did you make straight lines? Asked Mr. Strickler. That's the rule. Stay in straight lines. Now get ready. Get set. Pull! The children and Mrs. Scout pulled in one direction. Mr. Strickler pulled in the other direction. Mrs. Toggle tried to make herself small and wiggly, but with thuds, bumps, bangs, and kerplop, they all ended up on the floor once more. Mrs. Toggle's collar was as far as her nose, but no further than that. Mr. Strickler said, Enough of this. We don't want holes in the school floor just because of Mrs. Toggle's zipper. I'm calling the custodian. I'm afraid I'll have to cut this coat off. No! Yelled the children, and Mrs. Toggle cried, Never! The custodian, Mr. Abel, arrived wearing his big work apron. Tools bulged in every pocket. He looked at Mrs. Toggle in her coat. Is the building too cold for you? He asked kindly. Maybe the thermostat's off. I'll go check it. Wait, said Mr. Strickler. See, said Caroline. Mrs. Toggle can't get her coat off because the zipper's stuck. Yes, the principal said, and there's a problem with that thingamajig. Mr. Abel listened carefully. He said. I can see the pull tab is gone. The what? The children said, and Mrs. Toggle and the nurse and the principal all together agreed. The what? I said the pull tab's gone. Don't worry, I've seen worse, said Mr. Abel. Mr. Abel pulled a pair of needle-nose pliers out of the huge apron pocket. He used the pliers to loosen the grip of the zipper's metal teeth on the shiny fuchsia-colored lining of Mrs. Toggle's coat. Gently with his large fingers, Mr. Abel eased the line away from the teeth. Then he slid the zipper down, down, down. It opened completely. Mr. Abel helped Mrs. Toggle off with her coat. A happy smile spread over Mrs. Toggle's face. Mrs. Scout and Mr. Strickler and the children all cheered. Yay! It's off! You should get a new pull tab for that zipper before you zip it up again, said the custodian. I surely will, Mr. Abel, said Mrs. Toggle. I am forever grateful to you. The principal went back to the important matters in his office. Mrs. Scout rushed off to check a child who had chickenpox. Mrs. Toggle and the children went back to their room to tackle their timetables. They enjoyed doing math together. Mr. Abel pulled a small pad from his huge apron pocket and wrote himself a reminder. Remember to look up thingamajig in the dictionary. What a cute story. Mrs. Toggle lost her thingamajig on her zipper. I hope you guys have all your thingamajigs still on your zipper so your coat can go up and down. Enjoy the winter time, my friends. See you next time.